This is TWiT.
Joining us to talk about the persistent problems with Russian malware on our home and office routers is Patrick Tucker from Defense One. Welcome back to the show, Patrick.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So back in May, the FBI told us that the Russians were attacking our routers, but if we wanted them out of there, all we had to do was turn them off and turn them back on. Now, you attended a talk at DEF CON by Rob Joyce, a senior advisor to the director of the National Security Agency and the former White House cybersecurity coordinator, and he said that is not enough. So what can you tell us about this?
Right. So everyone remembers this big incident in May. It was kind of a weird thing for the FBI to tell you to restart your router, right? But the thing is that act of restarting, all it did was freeze a process that had begun. It doesn't actually remove the fundamental problem. So the way that this malware from the GRU, by the way, from basically Russia's military intelligence arm, the way that it works is that it works in three phases. The first phase, it gets into your router and it sort of establishes links there to other outside internet connections that it's going to make contact with, and it also begins to kind of like burrow into the reboot persistent memory. The next phase is where it becomes a big problem, and this is where it can exfiltrate traffic data from your router, and that's anything that you're doing with your router that's connected to your computer and the internet, which is all of your surfing and a ton of other stuff, incredibly sensitive and personal things, or potentially use it as part of a larger botnet attack. It's sort of up to, at that point, the GRU. The notice in May to turn off your router kind of halted that at phase one, where really the malware is just sort of settling in before it could get to phase 2 or 3. And everyone forgets about it because, we have things to do and we've restarted our routers and now off we go to use the internet the way we think that we're supposed to. And Joyce brings up this big problem in this talk. I put a lot of credibility in him, not just because he was White House cybersecurity coordinator, but before that, his job was head of the NSA's tailored access operations. He's kind of, in many ways, the government's most important offensive information security expert. So it's kind of like the U.S. government and NSA's most important hacker as head of that unit within the NSA. And he points out that, just by stopping this malware from activating in phase 2 and phase 3, where it's doing all of its dirty work, doesn't mean that it's actually removed at all. In fact, it's still there, and in what the word he described to me is in an uncontrolled state. But the reason we didn't talk about it or talk about it anymore is because the FBI can't go ahead and remove that from your home router. The original report on it from Talos and Cisco, they list the vendors that are affected by this problem, but actually getting it off, you bought this router, and no one wants to deal with this problem, but it's kind of up to you to do that. So Joyce, in this comment, really wanted to emphasize to everybody, hey, vendors, the cybersecurity community, and everybody has to work together to give basically folks that bought this thing a way to get this stuff off, because as he points out, it's not like the Russian military forgot all of the IP addresses where this stuff has already been installed in that initial state. So it really speaks to, I think, this huge problem, which is that, we hear about cyber vulnerabilities and things like this, and after the moment of reportage, we all kind of move on, kind of waiting for something bad to happen. And if it does happen, then we have congressional investigations and Mueller campaigns and et cetera. And if it doesn't happen in a really conspicuous way, we'd sort of continue on that marching on. But once you take home a device like this and it's been compromised, you can obey instructions as they come to you from the government, but that doesn't mean that you've actually fixed the fundamental problem.
So maybe the better advice would have been to turn your router off and then never turn it back on.
Yeah, throw it away.
I don't know. That's something that I hope maybe some folks are actually doing with their routers right now. I mean, I don't want to foist new routers on everybody, but this is sort of an amazing thing. It's like 500,000 routers, potentially maybe even a bit more. The original reporting from Cisco Talos leaves that kind of open. This is a very difficult thing to quantify, but to put that in the range of 500,000 kind of like bottom floor, that's terrifying. And 54 countries. So this is like a huge problem. The problem also is that we have to examine it in the context of all the other cybersecurity problems that we're talking about like all the time. And this was something else that emerged from DEF CON that I, was also sort of like terrified about. You can go to these hacking villages, these awesome hacking villages, and the one that got the most press this year, very similar to last year, was like the election hacking village, right? Where we're taking a look at both voting machines and also at websites that are linked to state election boards and things like this. One 11-year-old kid was able to hack into a virtualized sort of mirror version of a Florida election site very quickly and change the virtualized simulated results. I think it was like 30 minutes. I sat with a kid, I think he was like 18. We busted into a Diebold voting machine. He like located the core processor. It's an Intel Circuit 2001. It's got to be running like, Windows 9.5, maybe like 2000. And just go ahead and look up all the potential vulnerabilities and exploits that you can perpetrate on that, and off you go. I also talked with Jeanette Manfra, who is the Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security for cyber stuff and election stuff. And she makes the point that any one of these little sort of pyrotechnic displays by themselves isn't like a huge deal. And you can't really perpetrate them at a scale to shift an entire national election in a way that where you won't get caught. But the potential for mayhem is very real. There's a lot of state election boards. They're very various. They have all sorts of different resource levels, all sorts of different attention levels. And it's a big deal to try and herd them all towards the best possible cybersecurity practices for all of their stuff, to really get them all on page with the best things that they can do to really secure their elections. And I walked away very sort of like reassured that there were folks in our government that are A, kind of like on top of it, and B, care enough about this to go and stick themselves in like a Las Vegas hacker conference and really talk about it. But that doesn't mean that like this is an easy thing that you can solve all at once just with a few speeches. It takes a lot of work and a lot of buy-in from a lot of people. And so it's worth paying attention to.
Yeah, and I think, kind of calling back to what you were talking about earlier, that's the challenge, right? Not only paying attention to it, but maintaining that attention to it. I feel like right now, in so many ways right now, we're being bombarded with stuff day after day, be it security, be it politics, whatever, that at a certain point, in order to deal with that, the onslaught of information, we hear something, we think we've dealt with it, we power cycle our router, and then we move on because we simply don't have it in us to continue obsessing over this minute by minute. And that seems like a much bigger issue here. People, is that how do you attempt to even solve that problem and kind of snap people back to reality and say this is worth like longer spans of attention?
Well, I think that the thing that people pay attention to is when a bunch of data that was exfiltrated from a political party that they know about all of a sudden leads to a massive news story that everyone has to pay attention to, and that we're still having like conversations and investigations about years later. Like that's the only thing that really does it, is when all of a sudden that information, that data, like that vulnerability results in a big problem. Mm-hmm. People in Ukraine, I think they're kind of aware now of potential vulnerabilities in their infrastructure, because in 2015 and 2016, lights went off in the dead of winter in parts of Kiev. For a long period of time. It was the same group that actually put all this malware on all these routers. So that's an effect. We pay attention to the effect. The vague threat, unconnected to a possible consequence, so much harder to pay attention to. I don't have a solution for that because, we don't pay attention to vague threats. We pay attention to an absolute understanding of how something bad is going to affect us.
Or is already happening. Yeah.
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 So if you don't recommend that we just get new routers, are there any recommendations? Obviously, like make sure that our router has all the security updates. Is there anything we can do?
I think we'll first go back and take a look at the original report from Cisco Talos, and that'll tell you whether or not you should actually be fretting about your router. And I think that they do actually have some guidelines, and maybe you should buy a new router. It sort of depends on how how worried you are really about this, and also whether or not you have one of the routers that's listed there. That's something to consider doing, is just going out and buying a new one, because I don't think that there's like a super easy fix, but there is a fix. More broadly, and this is something that I brought up with the government folks that I talked to, because they want to talk on this, but they can't. They never can. They just can't do it. We have a national vulnerabilities database, right? It's maintained by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And I mean, I don't care how you vote or who you are. It's a great example of like good government, like us paying tax dollars for something that actually helps everybody, like this huge database that lists all the potential problems that could have been found to date. 80 to 90% of like, the problems that are going to affect, Experian and your, credit data, Sony, all of these other things, that's in that database. There is no law that says that chief intelligence officers have to make sure that every system that's under their jurisdiction is up to date on all of those patches. There's also no money to help, for instance, hospitals to do that, to make sure that every old computer that they have is fully up to date, because some of them are going to need new operating systems, some of them are going to need new equipment. It's a big capital expense too. This is the sort of thing that government could have a big impact on, finding money to help institutions that need to patch and buy new equipment, and also maintain and through law some mandate that chief intelligence officers, chief information officers actually try. That's a policy issue. And the thing is, all the government folks that I talk to, they know that they can't make like policy recommendations when they talk to people, because policy is for Congress and folks that we elect. But they all know that that would be like a huge deal. Like that would make like a huge difference. All of this coverage would go somewhere else.
Maybe we need another branch of the military, the cybersecurity force. If I were president.
Now you're thinking, yeah.
Oh, man, don't get me started. Oh, you're going to give me a attack. I have to talk that one.
Patrick, thank you so much. Patrick Tucker is a technology editor at Defense One. It's always great to talk to you, and we look forward to talking to you soon. We'll keep hounding this, and I would elect you the head of the cybersecurity force.
Well, thank you. That's a terrible decision, but thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Patrick. We'll talk to you soon.